We're going to begin our discussion of forces here. This is on page 27 in your unit packet if you'd like to follow along in your own notes. I want you to today be able to describe a force and also use vectors to help you describe a force. Let's first define what forces are. A force is a push or a pull. Force is described by its magnitude and the direction in which it acts. Force is a vector. So because we know vectors have both magnitude and they have direction, we can use vectors to describe forces. I said that forces are pushes or pulls. So in this image here, we have a man pushing a box. He is applying force to the box by pushing it. In this picture here, we have a man pulling a rope, so he is also applying a force, but this time he is pulling instead of pushing. Because force is a vector, you can use an arrow to represent the direction and the strength. Again, vectors have two components. They have magnitude and they have direction. The direction of the arrow represents the direction of the force, and the length of the arrow represents the strength of the force. So essentially, we have our direction. Whatever direction the arrow is pointing is the direction of the force. And the length of that arrow, just as we described vectors, the longer the length, the more magnitude they have. It's the same idea here, and we're going to apply that knowledge of vectors. Let's look at a few examples. Here we have an arrow, and it is pointing north. And if we described its magnitude, we could say it is 5 newtons north. So notice again, we have our direction and we have our magnitude. Now, newtons is a unit of measurement that describes forces. Just as we could use miles to describe distance, we use newtons to describe the intensity or the magnitude of a force. Looking at this next arrow here, we can tell without knowing anything else about it, it's pointing south. And also we can say its magnitude is less than 5 newtons north, because by comparison between the first arrow and this one is much smaller. In fact, it is 2 newtons south. One final example, we have an arrow or a vector pointing to the east, and we can tell its magnitude is much greater because it has a longer length. In fact, this vector is 10 newtons east. So notice there's a ratio between these arrows, these vectors, and the longer the vector, the more magnitude they have. That's just like a brief overview of forces and how to describe a force using a vector. If you have any questions, please see your science teacher.